Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, August 19th, 2019. This is the Wilmette Park District special meeting of the Board of Park Commissioners. First on our agenda this evening is a roll call.
Commissioner Abbott?
Here.
Commissioner Murdoch?
Here.
Commissioner Schisler?
Here.
Commissioner Clark?
Here.
Commissioner Goebel?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Wolf?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. In our packet this evening, there are quite a few communications and correspondence from residents in favor of the trees, in favor of removing the trees, both ways. We also have a separate packet that has been given to us commissioners that is from when the packet was first circulated on Friday until, I think, 5:30 today, which will become a permanent part of the record as well. It's just not something that is going out. It's just more emails and things like that. So that's all this in here. Did any other commissioners receive any other communications or correspondence they'd like to mention at this time?
I forwarded everything along.
I forwarded everything along.
Okay, great. Everything that was forwarded along will become part of the permanent record. Next on our agenda is recognition of visitors. At this time, we will ask anybody that would like to address us to come to the podium. Raise your hand and I'll call on you. Come to the podium. If you could state your name and your address. And please address all comments to the full board. We'll have 3 minutes per person just so we can kind of keep it moving along, so try to keep your comments within that. Mr. Wilson will raise his hand when you have 1 minute left to speak, and so that we can get everybody heard this evening. Please try to avoid any inflammatory remarks, and it won't be a discussion between us and you all. It'll just, we'll be taking your input, and then we'll be having a discussion in the next part of our meeting. So with that said, is there anyone that would like to address us? Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
I asked you guys, why do you want to cut down the trees? I think that's a pretty good question from a 3-year-old. This is Natalie. This is Richard. I'm Ben Tolsky. We actually are here for Hibbard Park, not for community playfields, although we support not cutting down trees there. But we play at Hibbard Park every single day, pretty much. It's our local park. You want to cut down 8 trees, and we understand you want to plan for the future. You want to have an expansion for the rec center. That's awesome. You guys set aside 2 chunks of land for that, when it's only going to go in one of those chunks. Why not just say, let's put it in this chunk of land, put it where the baseball field is at Skokie and Glenview, and let the parking lot, impermeable asphalt, be detention for water. You can save our trees, save our park. Please don't destroy the park that we play in. We need those trees for shade. The sledding hill that's there, we play on all the time. That's going to be destroyed as well, probably, with this project. Keep our park a park. Use the impermeable asphalt and save our trees. That's what we're asking for. That's all we care about. Right, guys? Yeah. We love our trees. We do. All right. You guys want to say anything? No? All right. That's all. We're good. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come here, guys.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Hi. As a veteran, my name is John Norris. As a veteran,
Could you state your address, please?
2639 Marion Lane. I'm right next to the park, actually. I use that community playfield a lot to relax, to deal with some anxiety disorders I have. That grove... Okay. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Usually not hearing me is not a problem. Okay. Okay, yeah, as I said, my name is John Larson. I'm a veteran. I have some anxiety disorder problems. I use that grove to relax a lot in. To me, that grove is very personally useful to me. So yeah, it's probably a selfish reason, but to me, that grove is very, very important. If there's another alternative, I would definitely ask that you consider that one as opposed to the other, because this one is worth more than any therapy has ever been to me. Okay, that's all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
My name is Paul Plotnik. I'm here with my wife. We live at 3133 Hill Lane in Wilmette. We've lived there since 1983. We're a block from the park. We enjoy that park. We enjoy the trees in the park. We have planted a memorial tree in that particular park. I know that there's a more expensive option that they can take, supposedly to save more trees. I'm hoping that that's exactly what they're going to do. It takes a long time to replace a huge tree. I know they say they're going to plant trees, but they're not going to plant trees that are of that size. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm also a veteran.
Thank you for your service, both of you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm Sophie Candido, 1221 Colgate Street. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Colgate Street Neighborhood Association. We've been encouraged by our two-way dialogues with the Park District and engineers about the specifics of the stormwater management project impact on Thornwood Park. We've been encouraged by the language and visuals present in the Memorandum of Understanding as it related to Thornwood Park. And we're thrilled that alternative configuration number 2 is being proposed. We feel more at ease with the language printed within the MOU as it pertains to the ability to slightly modify the proposed vault before the intergovernmental agreement is signed. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the Memo of Understanding. The storage reservoir configuration and excavation limits shown are conceptual, with the purpose of identifying the storage reservoir location and approximate footprint. Exact footprint and limits will be defined during final engineering design. The location of the equipment pad and/or pump station and generator will be determined in conjunction with the Park District at a later date. This wording is consistent with written and verbal communications we've had with the Park District Board and staff. We look forward to working together to gather public input from our neighbors in reaction to design proposals. Our neighbors would love to give further input about pump station location, generator type and location, presence of additional amenities, e.g. restrooms, and vault and excavation location. We hope to have access to all proposals and designs in order to gather public input. We also hope to continue to ask questions at meetings in the future after the engineers present new ideas. It makes our communication a lot more efficient when we can give public input after seeing the latest presentation. We also felt that the May 22nd, 2019 meeting within Thornwood Park was very helpful for data gathering, and we'd like to request at least one other public meeting is held in the park before the intergovernmental agreement so that neighbors can visually and viscerally react to proposed configurations and usages. And as we've also mentioned in other emails, we hope to be involved as language is drafted to cover topics such as routes of construction trucks, hours of construction, safety and security at the construction site, road repavement and legal protection against unforeseen consequences of construction, such as water runoff issues for neighboring properties, radon, damage from construction, dust, etc. We hope to have enough time for our local land use lawyer to review each draft. So as you can tell, Thornwood Park is beloved by its users exactly as it is. The Park District has done an exceptional job of designing a park that's perfect for its users, and we hope that after construction, the park remains exactly the same as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Charlotte Adelman. I live at 232 Lawndale. I've lived there for 46 years with my husband. Last time I was here, I testified in favor of a modified Z plan that would save all the trees and the roots of all the trees so they would live forever and ever. Today I'm here, and by the way, I don't live near Community Playfield. I'm not here because I personally enjoy it every day, but I'm here because I enjoy it when I do go there, and I believe in the principle that I'm trying to express today, which is that I think that we have to have our primary viewpoint on all the things we're going to do in our village, whether it's the Park District or the village itself, which is to be aware of the main problem that is facing humanity today, which is global climate change. And I think that every action that a park district or a village takes has to be made with that in mind, and it either will increase global warming, it will decrease global warming, or it will have no effect on it. But I think that with an actual threat like that is so enormous that everybody in this room is fully aware of it, and the entire globe is fully aware of it, is something that can't just be overlooked. So I'm asking you to make your decisions on this issue and all other issues with the paramount and overriding issue of global climate change in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eileen Engelhard, and I live at 2431 Pomona Lane. Kind of nervous. Thank you to all of you for all that you've done for the Wilmette community. We love our parks, and you've done an outstanding job in terms of all the parks. I'm here to plead to spare the Highcrest Grove of trees and allow it to stand. There's been so much angst in the community all summer with regards to taking out a grove of trees in this day and age of climate change. It breaks my heart to hear from people of all perspectives, young and old, speak with passion to save the trees. We've lived in Wilmette for 28 years. As a soccer mom, I know the value of playing fields, and our 5 children played soccer, 4 of them on those community play fields, some who went on to Wilmette Wings, the New Trier High School teams, and even a state championship. There was always enough room to practice and play here. I don't see the need for more fields. The population of children ebbs and flows, and I think that's really important to remember. Schools open and close, but the destruction of a treasured tree grove is permanent. I met with a village trustee from another town this past weekend who was at a statewide meeting, which I believe Wilmette was also represented at, and they were talking about a trend that was kind of going a little bit away from sports and more towards the arts and theater, which is another reason where these fields might be underutilized in the future and will be left, looking at fields. During the April 17th, 2018 meeting, the minutes read that the village engineer, Ms. Berger, had noted that all the storage facilities would be underground and expected the restoration of the parks to be what is seen today at West Park. That's quite alarming to me because that's crumb rubber artificial turf. Amy Griffin, the assistant head coach of the University of Washington, is anecdotally noting the increase of cancers among athletes, particularly soccer goalkeepers, and the increase of artificial turf surfaces that are around now, and they're made with old tires, which are known to be toxic. As a nurse, this speaks to me personally. My children are older now, but I'd be very concerned to have young children inhaling those rubber pieces. I remember seeing how those black pieces would get all over them when they played on those fields towards the end of their careers. Wilmette is known as Tree City, USA. Will we lose that designation? I've worked with Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, and the school's environmental committees, and they were all devoted to being environmentally friendly. The high school Civil War reenactment was an amazing thing on that playfield, especially when they brought the horses. Those children were sheltered from the sun on the north side, where the trees have since are not there anymore, but also in the Highcrest Grove. There are kids out there playing hide and seek, teenagers with slack lines, people with hammocks. There's fewer and fewer places where children and people can just be. We want to encourage all to disconnect from their devices and enjoy nature. We don't want to take it away from them. New young trees on a perimeter is not the same thing. Several other huge trees in the field provided shade, like by the baseball diamond there, but they were never replaced. What happens to the houses surrounding the park when external water is sent there? The issue of localized flooding is very real, given that a gigantic impervious tank is being put into the ground. Jay Fry, former principal, wrote on the petition that I'm sure you're all quite aware of now. I opened Highcrest Middle School in 1995 and was the principal through 2003. I had the pleasure of watching thousands of students enjoy the grove. Trees are a valuable and limited resource to be enjoyed by all. If there's an alternative to the placement of the reservoir, it should be used. The community playfield has many huge open spaces. It's 39 acres. There are certainly better locations that would not require the removal of the grove. Thank you all for your consideration.
Thank you.
Could I just make a statement about turf fields? I know it's a little.
Maybe when we have our discussion later.
I think several of us probably would.
Thanks.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Might need to put it near your. There you go.
Shorter. First of all, I want to mention that there were no more packets. I think half of the people here don't have them. You handed out packets, you said?
There were, I don't know how many were printed out.
There weren't enough.
So,
There were not nearly enough.
sorry.
Anyway,
It's
just
hard to
thought I would-
estimate.
That's okay. Just wanted to mention it. So
And there's a lot of trees.
Exactly.
that's true. No, we don't want packets anymore.
We try to go digital, so.
So I'm Lisa Eatman. I live at 2343 Meadow Drive North. I've already submitted an email letter to all of you, encouraging you to save the trees. I'm a lifelong resident of Wilmette, of this neighborhood. I lived on both sides of the park, 2 sides of the park, and I am in favor of the Z plan. On Saturday, Commissioner Murdoch responded to my prior email indicating that it would cost $1.5 million to make playing fields at a later date. The commissioner indicated he would like to explain tonight, if he has time, the details in his thought processes. Anyway, thank you for the response. Last night, I again watched the tape of the July meeting where the board took an informal vote. A couple of commissioners had pretty consistently favored the original plan. A couple were interested in the Z plan, and a few were flexible and wouldn't rule out the Z plan or some other plan that preserved the trees. Very quickly, that changed, and a major issue at hand became drying out of the existing area near the fields. Near the trees, which the Z plan does not address. I looked at the plans again and kept thinking, why can't we just add the extra vault to the Z plan? I called the village today and found out that it would cost $1.2 million now to do the extra vault, to dry up the area and still keep the trees. At a later date, it would cost $300,000 to remove them and make playing fields. I would encourage the Park District Board to ask the village if it is willing to spend the $1.2 million now to install the tank. This is a $68 million project. 1.2 is not pocket change, but it's an amount that doesn't make adding the tank completely out of the question. I request that you confer on this or other options with the village representatives and engineers who are probably here tonight before making a final decision. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jeff Sachs. I'm at 2412 Meadow Drive North. I stood before this group a week ago. I've stood before the village board expressing my views. I sent an email to all of you over the weekend. I did get one response. I just wanted to address a couple of things that were in the response that I got, because I suspect that it may be shared by a number of you. I am still perplexed by where this perceived need comes from to increase the usage of the park. I work from home. I see the park every day. I see it when school's in session. I see it when it's out of session. I see it on the weekends when kids are playing soccer. I see it when kids are playing baseball. I have never seen the park to capacity, not even close to capacity, where at least it looks like it to the casual observer. So I don't understand where this need is coming from. I've looked in past board minutes to try and understand what people mean when they say there is more demand, or we need more space, or we need more usage. And again, I don't see it in the minutes. Maybe it's there, but if it is, it's too hard to find, or it's buried. I've seen numbers where the savings between the plan to save the trees and the plan that results in the trees being cut down is a $750,000 to $800,000 difference. One of the comments that came back was that the cheaper plan, which saves the trees, has an estimated maintenance cost of $20,000 per year. Okay, $20,000 per year to save the grove of trees. I don't know what the maintenance cost would be for the other alternatives. But then there was the issue of inflation on that number and what it was going to cost 100 years from now. Well, you can't look at cost without looking at commensurate income. You know, starting salaries when I started in the workforce were under $20,000 for professional degrees at a master's level. So clearly inflation affects both expenses and income. To say that it's going to cost over $100,000 a year 20 years from now, or 100 years from now, to me is something I would disagree with emphatically. The other point I want to bring up is, why is there the need now? If we decide or determine that there is a need 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, I've seen one of the numbers reported in this response back to me was that it was going to cost $1.5 million to convert or take out those trees sometime in the future if we don't do it now. I find it incredible to believe that it's going to cost $1.5 million to cut down the trees and convert that land into usable space, if that's a decision that is necessary years from now. So I think that a lot of this goes to the fact that there could be increased communication with this board. to everyone in the village. I'm reminded of several years ago when there was a bond referendum for New Trier, and it got turned down by the village. That was a big surprise, and it turned out it was all due to communication or lack of communication between a board and the village. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yep.
Arlene McAllister, 323 Wilshire Drive East. And just want to thank the Park Board for negotiating and approving a memorandum of understanding tonight to authorize final planning for a stormwater project for the west side. It's really critical for the west side. This is something that's been going on a long time. I have a 2009 study, a 2014 study, a 2015 study, the update of the 2015 study, another meeting in 2017, the latest rounds, and 800 complaints from West Siders in 2013 when there was flooding about sewage, water, and everything else. So this is really something that has to be done, and it's been under debate for so long. Tonight, you're seeing, getting into the details, so I really appreciate the board taking action and actually getting this to shovel-ready, actual start to a solution. Just to put the tree thing a little bit in perspective, I did find out that in Wilmette, the village typically cuts down 200 to 300 trees per year and replants that amount, just so we have some perspective. And I would also say that I've been up at this podium complaining a lot, but I do have a lot of faith in the village of Wilmette managing projects like the Locust Street reconstruction that's going on now. It doesn't seem possible to have a committee work out every single detail of a construction project, but we have a director of public works who can oversee that. And the last thing is I would just like to read a little bit, this sounds a little bit harsh, but a reality check. A West Side resident at the final vote, when the village board said instead of option 1, redoing all the conveyance, they were going with option 3. Someone spoke and he said, I think we all deserve equality and we all deserve fairness. There's tremendous suffering that people are enduring in this community that I don't think is talked about enough. You've got people on one street in Wilmette that are lounging during a storm, just relaxing, eating their chips, watching TV, and you got people on another street in Wilmette that are trying to figure out how to get rid of all the gallons of water that are rushing into their home. Next morning after a storm or during a storm, you have people that are comfortable leaving their driveway to work. Meanwhile, you've got other people on another street that are trying to figure out how they're going to even get to work because the whole street is flooded. You have people that can barely sleep at night during a storm because they remember what happened the last time when it rained and for longer than 30 minutes. And so in the end, this contributor said, everyone in Wilmette deserves the minimal standards of flood protection, every single person. So thank you so much for taking action and not just kicking it down the road. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is
Oh, you might need that.
My name is Margot Turner. I live at 725 Locust Road in Wilmette, and I've owned that property since 1959. That was before the Park District bought the Anderson Farm. And so I remember seeing cattle grazing on that land. I remember beautiful willow trees that were there. I'm sorry that most likely nobody else in this building can remember that. In 2008, there was a microburst that came down Birchwood. It took out trees on everybody's property. the entire length of Birchwood. Birchwood runs right, if it kept going, it would run right into the park where the play lot is. There are, I think, 4 or 5 cottonwood trees. I lost a linden and silver maple. The cottonwoods lost 1 branch. That's how strong those trees are. And I have read things on the next door neighbor about this life of a cottonwood tree. I don't think that that was accurate. And that's all I want to say. Oh, one more thing. I came home from volunteer today and found out that the village is cutting down 8 trees on Locust Road as part of the surprise. They didn't know it either. They were going to do it. And the magnificent cottonwood was the first one down today.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Jan Barshis. I was here last week and spoke then. But there is one aspect to this that's been brought home to me, particularly today. There was an article in the Tribune today about people who live in Chicago are having their water lines relined and on about that. And they came out this morning, a lot of them, to find that their trees were gone. They had no part in that. There turns out that there is an alternative to the method that the city is using right now, but the Tribune doesn't ordinarily make a big deal about things like climate change, which they're doing better on now. But this particular article really spoke to me, is that if we're not looking for other alternatives to save what is natural, what is good, what is healthy, then we need to take another look at what we're doing. And the very last comment that the Tribune made, and again, this is something I never would have expected from the Tribune about trees, it said, trees are more than shade providers for any residents. They are a sacred amenity deserving protection. And I think if we go back to a number of the people who spoke last week about how they gained solace from those trees and how it has helped them stay mentally healthy, that we really need to keep things like that in mind when we're looking at what we're going to do with the trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Rick Prohoff, 2435 Pomona Lane, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Friends of Highcrest Grove, which is a not-for-profit, which you're all aware of. I'm not going to take up a lot of your time. I just wanted to address one of the comments. We are not against or opposed to, for the most part, in terms of members, the stormwater management of the system. We're solely trying to save the trees. There are other alternatives. There are less expensive alternatives. And our main concern is, yes, we're sympathetic to the plight. We have become aware that this has been a 5-year traumatic experience for a lot of people in the village. But she's right. We have not suffered from that because we are on higher ground. We've only really discovered the depth of the problem since the relocation from Centennial Park was determined about 5 months ago. So I want everybody to really understand that I think most of the people here who are trying to save the trees are not necessarily opposed to an underground neighborhood storage system in and under the park. A memorandum's concerned, I note on your agenda is to either approve or not approve, but the exhibit attached is the alternative to take down the trees. I assume that's just because that's the way it was put together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Kim Sterling. I live at 840 Chilton Lane. I'm in West Wilmette, but I'm not affected by the flooding. My son played soccer for 12 years. I have many fond memories of freezing Saturdays sitting at the park. I can't stand here and argue for taking down the trees at all, but I do want to really support the underground storage and doing something to help the people in West Wilmette who are really affected by the flooding. And I hope something can be worked out, and I just wanted to support those efforts going forward.
Thank you.
I'm Nicole Larson. I live at 2639 Marion Lane. Although I have not lived here since the 50s, my parents and I moved when I was 4 years old in 1967. So I've been here a long time, too. I remember when they were first putting in the heavy metal chain rubber tire swings in the area where that artificial turf section is now. They were building over there, and I would run over there every few days just to play over there and talk with the construction guys. Safety was not then what it is now, okay? But the point is, I've seen a lot of changes in that park since then. A lot's been added. Let's not take the nature out. That's needed. I'm not arguing against the water reservoir situation at all. I recognize the need for that, as do at least many of the rest of us in here. But please, let's not destroy nature in order to do something else. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Joel Solomon. I live at 2349 Meadow Drive North. I've lived there for 27 years. I have extremely strong and fond memories of playing catch with my children in the park. And it's really one of the sweetest things to be able to walk over there and be in that beautiful tree-lined environment. I recently took a walk. I hadn't walked in the park for some time, and I walked in a couple-mile circle and finished up cutting through the park to come home. And I was just struck by how beautiful a park it was. And I would hate to see it to be just a field. I understand the need for flood control, and I hope that those two goals of having a beautiful tree-lined park and flood control can be reconciled. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Martha Hollander. I live at 2517 Thornwood in Wilmette, and I brought some cottonwood branches and leaves for you all just to represent the trees. As I said when I spoke to the village Board of Trustees, the Native Americans who lived here, the Potawatomi, believed that the cottonwoods were sacred, and that the sound of the leaves rustling was the prayers going up to the divine creator. And also, if you sat under a cottonwood tree, you could gain wisdom if you were having a difficult decision or conflict with somebody, and that you would receive wisdom through the rustling of the leaves. And I suspect that it was probably a form of meditation. Many people do that without having it have a religious connotation. But I would like to speak on behalf of the children of Wilmette. I happen to have a lot of experience with child mental health. I was on the National Advisory Mental Health Council for 4 years in Washington, where we decided on which grants to fund for research in mental health. And we know that mental illness begins in childhood. It's often not diagnosed then, but the first symptoms are often depression, irritability, and anxiety, and these occur in schools, and certainly in school children like Highcrest Middle School kids, junior high. One of the best antidotes for children experiencing these symptoms is to spend time in nature. And what a wonderful resource we have just happens to be right next to Highcrest School, where an aide or a teacher or a parent could take a child who's having a distressing time going in or whatever, to walk through that grove. I think it would be a very healing place and a wonderful place for the kids. So keep that in mind, too. And then one last thing I'd like to say is that ancient temples were designed to resemble a grove of trees, a sacred grove, because of they inspire awe, and you feel small in their presence. So we have this growing right in our lovely park. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening. My name is Dennis Roberts, and I'm at 720 Lacrosse Avenue. And I came to one of your earlier meetings, and I've been very involved over the last 5 years in trying to find a solution to the flooding problem in the West Side. And I'm very gratified to hear people speaking who want to save the trees, also recognizing the critical importance of moving ahead with some kind of a solution for the flood problems that we have on the West Side. And I know that you're at a very difficult spot with lots of feedback and with lots of specifics about what people would like for you to do. But I would also like to say, as a citizen in this community, I recognize your responsibility as a board responsible for the parks, as well as recognize the role of the village board in trying to negotiate all of these different perspectives. It's difficult. And kudos to you for sitting through all of the complaints, all of the questions. And I just hope that you can move forward and move forward quickly, because the West Side flooding problem is urgent. We've been lucky this summer. The storms have not been as bad as they have been for the last couple of years, but it's just a matter of time for more floods to come. So thank you for your diligence. You're working with the village board. The village board has been very, very responsive to feedback, and it's obvious tonight that you are as well. So thank you for your work, and I hope you can make a quick and expedient decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? No one else? Oh, we have one. Yes?
Gray, 724 20th
I'm sorry, could
Street.
you repeat that?
Brigita Gray,
Okay.
724 20th Street. And I came to the meeting last week, and from that meeting I was encouraged. I just kind of said, let me look up and see what I can find about underground tanks. And what I discovered, and I don't know what else has gone into this, but I found that it was better to do above ground, and these underground tanks were designed to put under parking lots, under highways, and under roadways. So why it's going under a park where the children play and under the trees and under the grass, I'm just astounded. And it also said that in cold weather areas, which we live in, because it's cold from November to March, that it's extremely difficult to maintain them because of the salt that goes in the sand, and that it takes an extreme amount of maintenance and costly maintenance throughout the years to do this. And then if I don't know what the design, if it's cement, it's supposed to not be good at all because of the cracking and the leaking. Once they're in, it makes it very difficult to find where the leaking is. These can bring massive problems down the road. Looks like it's just going to be an easy fix, multi-million-dollar project going in, saving everyone's water. Yet there's going to be exorbitant amount of cost involved after the project goes in, and that concerns me as a citizen in Wilmette. And living through the area during the time when a lot of families in the early 2000s, where families had to leave because they didn't make enough money to make their mortgages, and there was foreclosures. I was also here when all the trees were cut down at Malincroft. My kids were just beside themselves. So I just think that there are ways that we can do it. There's the High Crest parking lot, not the High Crest, on the lower side, the Wilmette Junior High, they just did that whole road. Why didn't it go under then? It's supposed to be under hard surfaces, so roadways, parking lots, and highways, not under parks. And I think when a cold water area, that it's detrimental to be putting something in that's going to be so costly and maintained with all the salt that we have in the water that runs off. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone? Okay. I think we will move along to our next agenda item, which is new business, and we will be discussing all of this, which I think is why a lot of you are here. We do have in the room this evening the Village of Wilmette and also the engineers that have come up with this plan that we as commissioners can ask questions to as part of our discussion if there's anything that anyone has any questions. But I think I'd like to open this up to hear individual commissioners' thoughts. Or do we need to make the motion first?
Have your discussion.
We'll have our discussion, and then we'll make the motion based on that. So, Commissioner Abbott,
I have
would
a
you like
couple
to
of clarifications.
Oh, sorry. I'll make sure Commissioner
Sure.
Abbott speaks
I have a
into
couple of clarifications. This is tangential to the trees and community playfield, or the one was the comment about turf fields being cancer risks and problems. Actually, we owe some gratitude to Stephanie Foster, a former commissioner, who brought that issue up to us in West Park. We have a turf field. That turf field was installed with an extra $400,000 to put in virgin rubber. That has been generally considered to be very safe, not the ground-up tires. And so I just want to make clear that this is a very different kind of field than the fields you'll find in other places. So I'm not going to talk about turf fields anywhere else, just the turf field that we have installed is different, and I don't share that concern about possible cancer risks for that field. The second thing is I want to again clarify, and I do have some background. I'm not quite the engineer that the engineers we have here, but I am a civil engineer, and I don't, these tanks I think are, they can be installed underneath grass. I'm not as concerned about salt because primarily we're not getting these massive washouts, and when we do, it's highly diluted. We're talking about major rainfalls, huge amounts of water coming in, and then they store them for very short periods of time. Where they are installed underneath streets are kind of a different configuration, and of course they are picking up the salts from that. So I don't personally, based off of my background, have a engineering problem with.
Brian, can you speak up a little? Sorry, they just can't hear you in the back.
It's and that was I just want to start with those two clarifications, and that's it.
Okay. Any other clarifications? If not, then we're going to just go discuss thoughts on this. So our goal this evening is to vote on a resolution once it's been put out there, and we need to come to some sort of conclusion so that we can have stormwater relief moving forward, and to all the people that spoke with us that we get this project going. So would anyone like to start us off on their comments regarding Thornwood, Hibbard, and the playfields?
Sure, I have a few thoughts, and just at the start, I just want to talk about a couple of things that I've heard kind of in the public dialogue, but then at the end, as we kind of go around, I'd like to then go through kind of my thought process, how I look at each of the parks and what I think is best in each of the parks. I'm not going to do that now, but I'll do it before the conversation ends. As I think a couple of the folks out here have mentioned, I think I've responded to every email that I've received. I think I've had dialogue with a number of people back and forth. I think I asked some questions to try to get some clarification. And I guess just as we start this discussion, I just want to, point out three things that I've consistently heard that I think need to be clarified, because I think there's some misinformation floating around. And Brian started to talk about turf, and I actually thought he was going to go in a different direction. So I'll start there. That I've heard a number of people talk about plans for turf fields at the community playfields, and obviously I haven't been on the park board for the prior 6 years up until this spring, but I haven't heard any of those conversations in any of our park board meetings and any of our committee meetings. I don't believe anyone up here is interested in putting turf at the community playfields, and so I think that's something that maybe as a group we can talk about and put residents' minds at ease, that I don't think there's any sort of a plan to put turf at the community playfields. I actually think it's great that we do have some turf in town. I'm glad that we have turf over at West Park, but I don't want it at the community playfields. I've also heard a number of people in my dialogues back and forth who've talked about the fact that the preferred option in the Memorandum of Understanding is the most expensive option. And I think Jeff had said something about an additional $750,000 cost, or $800. I think the village has estimated it as an $800,000 higher cost up front. But as Jeff and I were going back and forth, and I don't intend to get into discussions about inflation rates or discount rates or borrowing costs or whatever, but I do want to point out that any of the gravity-based systems do not have the same kind of maintenance and ongoing needs. And we can talk about a $20,000 annual expense being a minor expense, but over the 100-year life of a project, which is what we're predicting this to be, $20,000 a year adds up to real money. And so my personal belief is that the least expensive option is not the least expensive option, that I think in the end it will probably be the most expensive option. And that sort of gets to the third thing. I've heard a number of people talk about how we want to cut down all of the trees. And we're going to talk, we've been talking a lot about trees, we'll talk a lot more about trees, but I really look at this very holistically. And I wasn't on the park board when these plans first came forward, but when I stepped into the game, and I think 3 of the others of us did as well, there was a plan that the village brought to us. And that plan had preferred tank locations at 3 different parks. I think before we came here, it moved from the Centennial to the community playfield, which is why we're talking now. But that initial plan required the removal, I believe, of over 120 trees. And I think all of us have come back and worked with the village, and I'd like to thank the village for all of the time and energy and effort they've spent looking at alternative configurations. And we've done a tremendous amount of work considering those configurations. And in the Memorandum of Understanding, 2 of the 3 identified options are actually options that came out of those discussions. And so I don't think it's a fair statement to say that we're cutting down all the trees. I think a more accurate statement is that there was a plan to remove 120 trees. Now we have a plan that's probably going to result in the loss of 40 trees. I think it's okay to say I think we should remove fewer trees than 40 trees. But the fact of the matter is there have been great efforts, and I think there's going to end up being considerable expense by the village in order to preserve those other 80 trees. And so just at the start of this conversation, I want to recognize that. And then, as I said, after everybody's had a chance to talk, I'd like to double back on a couple of other things as well. So I just wanted to start the conversation with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Down here.
I also want to reiterate what Mike just, or Commissioner Murdoch just said. I don't know where the conversation with turf, as I've gotten several emails saying that that's what we want to do. When you look at cost, it's not necessarily the most expensive plan. It's not necessarily the most expensive plan. And
So I gotta kind of lean in.
Sorry. It might be hard to hear with the ventilation.
Yeah, the air
behind you.
conditioning's
If you
kinda
are willing,
loud.
you may wish to move forward, but we'll try to do our best to speak up.
I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So I think that for me at least, that the cottonwood trees are there because it's marshy when it does rain. And one of the reasons I liked the original plan is that it also not only addressed the community flooded area, but actually of the field itself. So.
Thanks.
I want to start, and I do want to start by thanking everyone who has communicated their emails, and I really do appreciate, I want to say like the tone of the emails. Everyone has been very polite, and I have really appreciated that type of approach, and same with the when you've spoken here. This has been a difficult time. I do wish we had additional time to brainstorm some of these ideas to try to reach it. As a parent who's also had 4 children who's played soccer, I have always looked at these as play fields. I do want to point out these trees are located in a water detention pond that was created for runoff from Highcrest School when it was built. So this is an area that, that was part of my memory of being on that playfield, was walking through there, and it was always wet. So that I hear that there you do play or do walk, but my own recognition is that there was always standing water, so that I was never able to participate in being in the shade of such of that. I also have to say that I have also seen the playfields as a playfield, not because I've had children who've played baseball, played soccer on there, and I've used it always as a playfield, and that is a very important part for children as well, to be able to go out and have exercise. It's an area that's used by 2 schools, by summer camps in the Park District for these playfields. I've been there with my kids shooting rockets when they were building rockets during District 39 summer school. So I mean, I see this as a very active use park, and that's another point. One of the things, though, that was brought up here, I think Lisa did, as to perhaps a way to keep many options open, is one that I would like to talk about more, is the possibility of going with I understand that from the village, maybe that there is yet another configuration that might be possible, which is, correct me, is a T-shape option?
Correct. It's basically a modification to the Z configuration, where that bottom right part that would be located south of the trees gets moved north of the trees, but south of the walkway.
Right.
So it'd make it more of a T formation. It saves $400,000 to $500,000.
So it would save some additional
compared to the
fees.
original
And
Z
so
configuration.
one if we can talk about, and I think there may be a raise, is actually, as I said, what Lisa did is putting a vault in that would take care of some of the drainage using the original stormwater, adding the vault, and then that leaves the option open that maybe not take the trees down at this point, but has that option that if it does become a needed point, that it can be done when this is not. So with that T-shape, which adds safe, and then add that, we're not talking about increasing the cost to a large extent.
But one of the interesting things with even doing that is that the whole reason that the trees are there in the first place is because this vault, or the above-ground storage facility exists, and because it is marshy.
Well, and I do want to, and there is one other maybe clarification. There's been a lot of comments about that these are ancient trees, that these are old growth. These trees are my age. The estimate is the trees are between 35 and 60 years old. I won't tell you where I fall in that. There is one tree, I mean, this is what we've had from the information we've received from the forester. There is one tree, or at least, I'm not sure, there are a couple of trees that are older, around 100 years old, but the majority of those trees in that grove are between 35 and 60 years old. So cottonwoods grow very fast. So the fact that they're big, they grow very fast. So.
Julia?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I want to start by recognizing how passionate everyone is about their park, whether it's Thornwood or Hibbard or Community or Votman or Maple. It's your own park. It's the place where you live and you walk your dogs and you teach your children how to ride your bikes. And for many of us, we send our kids to the schools and we observe the trees as we go by. But if it's in your backyard, you feel quite differently. And so I want to acknowledge that. And as a newer commissioner, and there are a few of us on the dais, it's been an educational process as we learn about the history of stormwater and how long this discussion has been occurring and how many people have had flooding and how many people have taken remediation steps into their own hands and, waterproofed their basement or fixed French drains around their yards and moved things away from foundations. And for all of us that have the means to do that, we've taken those steps, but different people have different means, and some people discover after they purchase homes that they are quite indeed flood hazards. So the stormwater program predates my involvement in the park board, and from the dates that were shared earlier predates my time in this community. We've lived here almost 5 years, and we've had the good fortune to live in other communities and to have basis for comparison when we moved here and selected this place for our family and for our children, and to recognize what a wonderful place it is to live here. And so in particular, that was one of the reasons I wanted to be involved in the park board but at the same time, part of that includes a responsibility to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our neighbors and by our residents. So as I think about and listen to the dialogue, and also as I've read all the many emails and read petitions and read Nextdoor postings and read dialogue online, I think there are a couple of areas that my colleagues have highlighted that I want to underscore, and that is the idea of what our principles are around community playfields. There's still so much to be determined. Tonight, our intention is to sign an MOU that says, "Dear Village, you may use these parks," and we will work out the details together over time. And that's essentially what the MOU says. But there are some things that I think we believe that should or shouldn't go back into the park. And one is we don't want artificial turf there at all. My children are soccer players. I'm a soccer player. And are there people who would wish it were a little smoother when you're running down the field? There are those people, but I don't think anyone wishes turf, and I certainly do not. So no artificial turf to the extent that perhaps has been rumored or circulated. No stadium lighting. Certainly while there are playing fields, there's no intention to do that in my mind. And I think third and maybe most importantly is a commitment to a minimum replacement metric. So if the outcome is that the cottonwoods are affected, and 31 as I understand the number, there would be a 62 replacement, or perhaps it's 93, or perhaps it's 124. So I think, I envision that there can be guidelines by which we work with the village to help replace this, whether it is at the village's expense, the park district's expense, or some combination thereof. And I think among the replacement, I think the natural thing is that people will say, well, you're just going to put in saplings. And I've watched these trees grow taller than my children and wider than they can put their arms around. And I think that's fair feedback. We can include a minimum diameter that we want to have among the mix of replacement trees. Perhaps there are 4-inch minimum or other diameters, and we can also specify. And I want to close where we talk about recreation, we talk about the use of the trees. I want to read a letter that an ecologist sent to the board, ecologist resident, a PhD, who wrote, and some of you may know Karen Glenmeyer, who's involved in Go Green. She wrote to the board, "Dear Board of Commissioners, I understand you're grappling with very difficult decisions with regard to the locations and sizes of stormwater tanks under Wilmette parks. As an ecologist, I applaud your decision to preserve oak trees at Thornwood and Hibbard parks. Oaks form the backbone of the Midwestern ecosystem, are slow-growing, and are in decline within the Chicago region. The ecological value of cottonwoods is lower than that of oaks, and they are a relatively fast-growing species that are abundant in our region. Therefore, while it would be ideal to save these trees at community playfields, their habitat value can be more easily replaced than would have been with lost oak trees. I urge you to follow through on your promise to replace the lost cottonwoods with trees of equal or greater habitat value, and I would urge you to go further than simply replacing the trees, but to create a functional habitat that includes oak trees, smaller trees and shrubs, wildflowers, using only species that are native to the Chicago region. Such an oak grove would provide habitat for birds, butterflies, and pollinators, as well as a new place for adults and children to explore, and there are places within Community Park that could accommodate it. It seems fitting to compensate the neighbors who will be losing their beloved cottonwood grove with something even more valuable and more inviting that will begin creating its own memories for neighborhood families." Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Karen Glenmeyer. So I am not an ecologist. I'm a business person and a parent and a marketer. I am also not an engineer, but I do want to see fiscally responsible work done. And so it is concerning to me that there is perception that the most expensive option would be selected out of hand, or that the park seeks to destroy trees, just because. I can tell you that this commissioner is taking the decision really seriously, and also it's taking both the staff and the village to task for keeping us informed about financial progress and making the best possible decision that we can with the information that's available. And with that, I'll probably hold my comments for further discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me pick up where you left off with Karen's email, and I have a great deal of respect for Karen, and she was very careful in the wording of that email, I could tell. She did not represent herself as representing Go Green in that, and her presumption appears to be that it's a foregone conclusion that the cottonwoods are going away, which I don't think is what is necessarily going to be the case. honestly, I think we're going to have personally, I think we're going to have a change of opinion. She said ideally we would keep the cottonwoods. So, I mean, it's not that she's advocating getting rid of the cottonwoods. She's saying ideally we would keep them. It's in the email. So I'm really sort of at a point where I'm a little bit, I just don't understand why we're at the point we're at with this. We have not made a case internally within the board or to the community of a need for these play fields that justifies what we're asking to do. And we're asking, and no offense, Mike, but this is the least expensive option is the least expensive option. Trying to, put $20,000 a year out 50 years or 100 years. You got time value of money. You know that as well as anybody else does. I can't understand why this is such a difficult decision for us. My thinking was, and I understand why we would like to have more playing fields, but we have not made that case anywhere. And why we would cut down that grove of trees, I hadn't been there for many years until I went back this year. And, it's a gorgeous grove of trees. And, yeah, at times it has water there, but, it dries up. The spell we had up until the last couple of days was probably dry for weeks. And it's beautiful. So I'm having a really difficult time thinking that we would rip out all those trees. And if we do, as a board, decide that we want to have the option to create more playing fields in the future, there is another option on the table that I don't believe costs an extra $1.5 million. I think would have to have the village come and explain that to us. But I think if we're going to go down that path of we want to have the play fields and we have an option to defer the decision on the play fields, but still do the project and keep the trees until we come to that point in time. And my guess is that we'll never come to that point in time because I don't think a board would ever go there again. And the fact that that's probably underlying it tells me we probably shouldn't be doing it now either. So that's my feeling on it. It's a bit.
Gordon, would you like to have the village explain what the other options are at this point? What would give you more clarity?
I think it would be very helpful, not just for me, but for others as well.
What is it we're asking the village to explain?
To explain the options that are sort of on the table, including this new T option and the relative cost. We've got numbers thrown out there of what they cost.
There has been some inconsistency with the numbers, and the original configuration had some features that others did not, and I struggle with the fact that we've gotten casual with the numbers. It's concerning.
I feel like even the numbers that were originally given to us have changed. So
Yeah,
that has been frustrating to try to get a sense of what would be the most sensible. So.
Hello, good evening. Matt Moffat with Baxter & Woodman, one of the engineers on the design team working on this. So I guess start with the explanation of the different options and some of the different numbers, and I will start with
This is just for clarifying. This is community playfields that we're talking about right now.
Community playfields, yes, thank you. There has been a change to all of the original numbers as we've progressed in our assessment and understanding constructability of the underground vaults at community playfield within the window of available time during the summer months when school's not in session. The original plan was to construct what we're calling the single vault, which is a single upside-down U on a concrete pad. And we have since then determined that the time it would take to install that concrete pad and then come in and stack the pieces on top, we don't have the time frame for that. So the price has increased a little bit for to have a double trap, like a double vault, so a upside down U and a right side up U that would stack on top of each other, that would provide its own concrete base in the installation, so just setting the blocks in. And so it's still the 6 feet tall It's just a different method of constructing it to save time. So that's one thing that has shifted the cost from the original to what's been
Can you just
presented
explain what you
mostly.
mean by time? We don't have time. Do you mean like the construction season?
Construction season to try to have we are coordinating with the school district to try to gain access through Highcrest School.
So probably May,
And so
May
our
to
June
August
11th
at
when
best.
school's
Okay.
out till August 24th when school resumes. We're trying to ensure that all of the heavy construction traffic can operate and get the job done within that time window. So that's the time constraints that I'm talking about.
Does the smallest, with the pump, the configuration that uses a pump when that has the smallest footprint, deeper, is that, how does that with timing? Is that even a shorter timing, or is it the fact that you're going down deeper at any time, or is that still, are you still looking at that being able to be done in a summer window?
That one, the deeper vault, I think that one went up to 11 foot 4 inches tall, internal vault or internal height. That one would be able to be constructed within that window. The smaller footprint, deeper construction does allow for efficiencies, both in some of that time savings and volume of earth that would need to be moved out by reducing the footprint is part of why the cost differences are realized there.
So those costs remain the same?
So that was alternative configuration 2. That one, the costs there have remained the same, yes. But the cost for the base alternative 1 and
So just so, because we've been using like Z and
so the original and the Z, those costs have increased a little bit based on the need for the double
vaulting.
Yeah.
And would you just share those costs with everybody, the numbers?
So yes, the original configuration, the new anticipated costs would be $11.7 million. Yes. The alternative configuration 1, or the Z configuration, is $11.4 million, so a $300,000 savings. These are both gravity-fed outlets. The alternative configuration 2, or the U configuration, is at $9.8 million.
And this has the pump?
This is with the pump. So that's a $1.8 million savings.
And that's unchanged. That's where it has been.
That's unchanged.
Okay.
And then we've heard some discussion here of the alternative configuration 3, or the T, which is basically an amendment or a more optimized Z configuration, as Steve explained, basically taking the lower leg of the Z and pushing it further north. That has to do with kind of the existing grades and elevations. We're able to get a more efficient design in there. That cost is $10.9 million, or an $820,000 savings. And the savings that I'm mentioning now are based off of the current cost for the original configuration.
Does the T configuration have a pump, or is that gravity fed?
As a gravity-fed configuration.
And do all four of these contain an extra tank for the current detention water?
The only one that currently contains an additional tank is the original configuration, the base configuration.
Could a tank be added to these other plans?
A tank could be added to it. A secondary tank to replace the existing detention could be added.
And what would that cost be?
So our estimate was $1.14 million to install and restore. The $1.5 million that has been discussed would be is additional funds to establish playing fields over it, over that area outside.
Putting grass back?
Yeah. The grade, I guess it's if it were to be built at another date outside of this project to restore the whole area for the construction site.
So then the Z becomes actually more expensive than the original, is that correct?
Because you'd add 1.14 to all of them?
Correct.
Well, I guess, is there something driving including the secondary vault? Does the school district need the secondary vault adjusted? Is there a reason we're including it? What's driving the inclusion?
So the secondary vault is basically if we need to relocate the existing detention facility that basically exists in the same space as the Cottonwood Grove. If we need to, so that has to remain in existence. The recent additions in early 2000, 2002, I think.
So if we leave the Cottonwoods, we have the detention, you
Correct.
don't need the 1.14.
Correct. If we leave the Cottonwoods, the detention remains, we work around it. We don't need to replace it for this project.
So really, it's if you leave the marsh and the field flooding is because that's what being caused by the retention pond. Is that correct?
The wet ground within the bermed area, if anyone familiar with that area knows within the grove, there's the bermed area and the low spot inside of that. That would remain getting, it would get wet after rainstorms. That's how it's designed. That's what's designed and intended to do.
And even if you put this secondary tank in there, as long as that bermed area still exists, it's still going to retain water. Is that correct?
It depends how, whether or not we rerouted the existing detention. So if a secondary vault were installed with the intention of rerouting the existing detention, we went through the permitting process to move that detention from the existing location to the underground, to a new secondary vault, and went through the permitting process with Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, then that area that is currently the detention basin could potentially, if that's the way the Park District Board and the Village Board decide to move forward, that could be removed, could be redesigned or reestablished as not being a detention basin, just being a low spot in the field that we could incorporate drainage into. Also, as part of this project, the intention is that there will be drainage improvements made to the field and the Park District area within the vicinity of the project. So we would be, anything outside of that intended detention basin, we would anticipate would have better drainage.
That's
and would
with
be
the
drier.
secondary vault.
No, that's regardless.
Okay.
Secondary vault would just
take the
allow
water-
the
or that
detention area.
the
Just for the
detention
room
area
and
to be
that
dry.
area.
Okay.
So in the original and the Z, there was, did that have more capacity in it than the double vault design because it was taking in the water that today is going into the grove?
They built a second.
Only the original.
The
So
original.
the detention available for all of these alternatives is the same volume. The difference is with the original configuration, there's an additional volume that would be constructed adjacent to and separate. So the original fee estimate right now does include that additional volume. It's a separate facility that would be installed adjacent but separate.
Okay, but the Z also was taking out the grove, right?
No.
No, I'm sorry, okay.
No.
It moved, okay, got it, I'm with you.
The only configuration that would be taking out the grove would be the
Okay,
original
all right.
configuration that of the now four presented.
And I'm assuming in terms of efficiencies that it would probably make more sense that if we thought that down the road that we might want to use it, use that area, that'd be better to put a secondary vault in now rather than, do the Z, close it, and then 5 years from now, we put in a secondary vault. And, okay, or maybe let's say 10 years from now, we say, okay, we need these fields. Put in the secondary vault right now. That the efficiencies would be probably cheaper to do, more cost effective now to do it now.
Than do it part
Yeah.
by part. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, then rather do it like 10 years from now, or, since I guess I'm just saying, assuming since the land is all being dug up at this point, that would be.
So as there's a significant cost to a contractor mobilizing and getting in and setting up work. So installing a secondary vault now would save that money as well as the inflation additional cost to install. Which, however, there would also, I would think, be some increased costs by the contractor having to, that would be more work that we're trying to squeeze into a smaller window, which would likely raise our construction costs somewhat as well. Knowing exactly how that balances out, we're uncertain of it this time.
Is there one configuration versus another that's the fastest?
Likely the U or the T, as they're the smaller foot. So the U would likely be the fastest, being the smaller footprint. The T has some efficiencies gained over the original and the Z. The smaller footprint and allowing for it to be a little deeper allows for some time savings.
But at this point, you believe, just to clarify, that you can get any of these configurations done during the summer building season?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Are there any drawbacks to a pump system? Other than the annual, you have to maintain it, or other than that yearly cost?
The maintenance is the primary concern. It's another mechanical entity that village staff have to maintain and check on and the residents have to rely on. It's something that would be designed with redundancies for the reliance, but just additional mechanical things for maintaining and replacing, much more periodic replacement than the vault itself.
But like the $20,000 a year you've estimated for, that includes all that additional maintenance?
The only negative that I can think of with the pump system is that you actually, the only negative that I can think of with the pump system is that you actually, at the play fields, have to have an enclosure. Is that correct? A house or something to house the pumping system?
It doesn't have to have a house or an enclosure. It could be a minimum of several concrete pads, maybe about the size of the space between us here, with some vents coming up, and electrical, one or two electrical control boxes, probably the size of this.
Like the gravity-fed system.
No, it's not. You would see, like you said, a concrete pad with some pipe venting coming out and a control panel maybe about the size of this. And then depending whether or not there's a permanent generator, if there's a permanent generator, that would be much larger, size of a small vehicle. And then we would need access to it for maintenance. So wherever we would end up wanting to locate it, we would likely want to install some sort of pavement, as it would need to be inspected weekly.
But that...
Say pavement, you mean like a road, so a truck could get down it?
A driveway, yeah.
I recall at Thornwood, we were able to move toward a solution that saved more trees when we went to a deeper configuration. I know that the U is a deeper configuration, but the Z is not.
Correct.
Is there any reason we would want to go shallow versus deeper? It looks like when you use the deeper configuration, there's almost always a cost savings. At least in the examples we've been provided.
Really, the reason to go shallow as opposed to deeper is limiting the need for installing a pump station, relying on the water to be pumped out versus allowing it to gravity drain out.
Okay.
And along those lines, just to clarify, and this is true for any of the parks. I think that Commissioner Abbott and I had talked about this sort of going in. My expectation was that across the board, I would have preferred a gravity-based system just because there are fewer things that can go wrong. I mean, the reality is we can talk about redundancies, but I know a couple of years ago, the pumping station in West Wilmette, which had two separate dedicated power lines running to it, both failed, and I live in West Wilmette, and I enjoyed pumping out after that. So we can talk about, yes, none of us enjoy that, I know, but we can talk about redundancies and safeguards and so on and so forth. But the reality is that no matter how many redundancies you have, it's possible, maybe very unlikely, but possible that they could fail. Is that correct? As opposed to a gravity-based system. A gravity-based system can't fail as long as we still have gravity.
Well, and yet there are 6 pumps down Lake Street. The entire system is based on those pumps, correct?
Correct.
And that's N+1. We need 5 of those 6 to be running in order for the system to work. So there is already a dependency upon pumps. But I would agree with Commissioner Murdoch that gravity would be preferable. You have to figure out where that lies in your priority system. Yes.
Fair enough.
And I think we're talking about not having 2 electric lines going in. We're talking about having some kind of generator that's powered by something other than electricity, right? Natural gas or something. That was the backup, right?
That is the current expectation. Anticipation is with a pump station there would be a gasoline, diesel, natural gas generator that could be either permanently fixed on location or a large trailer that could live at Public Works or somewhere that would be brought out in the need.
So I mean, the chances of everything going wrong, I think, are pretty low. I mean,
and again, the detention vaults will function in the first
we have
storm.
bigger problems if everything goes
The
wrong.
volume will still be available. The whole point of draining it out is to be ready for the next storm. So there's a number of things that would have to line up for us to have that need. Yeah.
Any other questions for?
You know, I do actually kind of have another question. I mean, I know the detention pond as it is there now is drained. It does have drainage pipes, right, that lead into the sewer system, like at Locust, that go off to Locust Road.
So there are storm sewers that run from Highcrest School that bring the water out to the detention pond, and it surcharges up into the pond from that storm sewer and fills up, and it retains that water for a period of time. And then there's a designed restrictor, so it's basically a smaller pipe. It lets the water drain away at a much slower rate back into the storm sewer system.
Do you know where that restrictor is located? I mean, this is part of sort of my question with the trees. I mean, if it's among the trees and if that needs services, what, you know, is there?
It's near the southwest corner of the trees and the edge of the berm, underground in a
that helps.
manhole.
Yes, okay, thank you.
But kind of the whole reason, my understanding and reading even from the Morton Arboretum and from a lot of about the cottonwood trees, is that they only really exist there because it is a marsh. And that if we were to, well, I mean, the website says around riverbanks and marshes and this type of thing, and that they're the fastest growing tree in North America. They can grow up to 6 feet a year, which is pretty fast actually, but because of that is they're weak wood, this type of thing, and actually Morton Arboretum says they don't recommend them in residential areas. So with that being the case, if we got rid of the marsh, my thought is that we might have another issue with the trees anyway.
One of the other concerns with cottonwoods, my understanding is that their roots are very evasive and can get into underground structures, sidewalks, foundations, and things like that. Is there any concern that we're putting, if we were to keep the cottonwoods, to put a massive multi-million-dollar tank there, and then it could possibly be eroded underneath the ground by these root systems?
I am not an arborist or forester. I do know that we are, and we've went out and measured the drip line of all the trees, and the kind of rule of thumb, common understanding is that the roots extend about as wide as that drip line, and our intent as we move into final design with whatever configuration we move forward with is to try to stay outside of that drip line with an additional buffer, and we're going to be working with the village's foresters on that. So the intent and expectation is that we would be clear of any concerns like that.
Okay. Any other questions for the engineers? Thank you. Thank you. All right, so moving more along to our discussion, do we want to, since Community Playfield seems to have, I'm sorry, did you want to make some points? Oh, sorry.
I would.
Oh, sorry.
That's
I
quite all right.
started with you, and then you kind of moved on.
No, I only wanted to make those clarifications. Now I would like to talk about the parks themselves. So one of the things that makes this board and working here, being here so fascinating is because park districts, well, you all heard Maslow's hierarchies. There's your basic needs, and basically the village, it takes care of those things like security and clean water, and they take care of, they're in the job of basic needs. We aren't. We're up there higher in what we call the psychological needs, and so we don't exist because of some financial formula. We exist for psychological, mental health. Our goal here is to increase the quality of life of our constituents. So it does make our job interesting because there's this balance, a balance between parks, balance between recreation. So I do recognize that each of us are running this through our own set of priorities. I do believe that we haven't made a case, as Gordon said, with regard to why we need to take these trees down. And I do also believe, as I've said many times, that our parks are like our children, particularly to those who live around the parks. Each one's different. We should take that as a compliment because the neighborhoods have really come to love their parks, and they don't want it to be like anybody else's park. They like their park. So when I get into one of these situations, I try to arrange my priorities because there's often conflicting priorities. Do I go with the cheaper one? Do I save the trees? Do we add more fields? So I stop and I slow down and I say, okay, where are my priorities? And my first priority when we were presented with this stormwater plan was to listen to the community. And I've said this before, but let's talk and let's listen to the community, because I had my doubts about the idea of using parks for village services, which is stormwater. But, we held a bunch of meetings, and we listened to the community, and what we heard over and over and over again was that the plan enjoys considerable community support. So, second priority, I'm going to get behind this plan, but I'm going to do so, this is my personal plan, was to do so without creating losers. And so what is a loser? Well, if we're going to fix one person's stormwater, we better not do it at the expense of somebody else. So most notably, I've been trying to listen to the neighbors for whom these parks represent a significant investment, both monetarily and emotionally. So I'm listening to them because, we're asking them for a favor. We want to dig up their park and put these tanks in. I went to all the meetings and continued to talk to neighborhood groups. So I'm going to start with Thornwood. I've had a great admiration for the job that the Thornwood neighborhood has done. They have also gotten behind the plan. I think that they've made some very reasonable requests, and I want to thank also the village engineers who've really also clearly working very closely together with the Thornwood group to come up with alternatives that address their concerns. So that's kind of like a win-win, and again, thank you all. Hibbard, we didn't get a lot of, until tonight, first time, and I don't know if that gentleman, he's probably left with his children.
Gone.
That was the first time somebody showed up. On the other hand, we did manage, you and I walked that park. We're saving a lot more trees, but there are 8 slated to come down. I don't know what to do about it at this point. I'm going ahead because, again, the neighborhood didn't come out. We didn't get a community dialogue. I think it's a reasonable compromise. So I'm okay with the Hibbard. So the big issue, the community playfields. Again, I don't feel like we've made our case. My goal has been to listen and to champion reasonable concerns about how to do this to create consensus. My goal has never been to create a better park, though I would not deny us the opportunity to make a better park, but I want to be very careful about what one person thinks is better. Somebody else may not agree with that. We've had hundreds of emails. We've had lots of petition signers opposing cutting down the Grove. Don't really have an alternative plan to show the neighbors as to why it's necessary to cut down these. We got something in the packet tonight, but we have some ideas about replacing trees with more trees, but we've had, 6 months and we haven't really come up with anything except ideas. I wouldn't call these plans. And whereas I would agree the cottonwoods maybe aren't considered the highest quality trees, they seem to be valued by a lot of these neighbors. The reasons vary, but it's the idea of the grove and not the species that seems to matter to them. And, I hear that. It's not like, oh, this is the greatest tree ever. It's this grove and what the grove means to them. And I'm personally not going to explain why cottonwoods aren't worthy of their affection. Again, it's like trying to convince them that their middling performing child doesn't deserve their love, when maybe you have an idea that in 20 years you could come up with a better child for them. So it's just again, I'm trying to find consensus. We could have taken the opportunity to improve the park, but I think we owe it to the community to be upfront about how we're going to improve the park and not just, throw around ideas, not cut down the trees and tell them that we're going to make it better. And so, let's see, because I need to wrap this up. I have no doubt we're going to move on. Whatever we do, we're going to move on. That's important. I will vote tonight for the alternative plans that don't involve removing the Grove, but then we'll move on. The stormwater plan needs to move forward. That was my #1 priority, and I believe that we need to save the Grove and then collectively put our energies behind the plan, and those are my thoughts, and no applause. No. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I guess I'm the only one that hasn't spoken, so I'll kind of give you my thinking as well. I've hemmed and hawed over this, gone back and forth. I also appreciate everyone's time, taking the time to write us, to call, to give us all your input. And again, we've heard it from both sides. It's not one-sided, and we never have an issue that's one-sided other than one time recently. But usually it's very both-sided. And a lot of times the people that are very vocal might be quiet as well. Like we just because you all aren't hearing it doesn't mean that we're not hearing it. No one wants to go out and say they want to cut down trees, but there's people coming to us saying, it's okay, so we've heard both sides of it. I have done a lot of due diligence, I think. I've done a lot of research. I've spoken to the Morton Arboretum, done a lot of online research. I've put together pros and con lists. But my big thing, and I've said this from the very start of this project with the village, is I want to make sure that all these parks have better drainage at the end of it. All of our parks tend to have drainage issues, whether it's Thornwood, whether it's Hibbard, whether it's the playfields, they all have drainage issues, and I'd like to see, if we are going to tear up these parks for these tanks, that when they're put back together, they have better drainage, and that's always something I've always said since the start of this project. So I have a hard time getting behind something that does not improve the drainage in a project. Obviously, we would be losing trees that are very, very valuable to people if we were to go with the original plan, but I do think that there are some pros with it. I think that it dries out the land for the school to use, and also for potential programming in the future. And I know people said they haven't heard that, but when the Park District brought the Bell School, which is now the Community Recreation Center, everyone's like, you don't have any classes to run there, you don't have anything to do there, but it quickly got filled with activities now that we're overflowing and need more space for our inside programming. I do think that this could be a really great opportunity to work with the schools and the children in the local community to come up with a plan to plant some prairie gardens, to plant some trees, to plant some learning activities for the children in this park that they could learn year-round about moving forward. As we've said before, these are play fields. I know that a lot of people use them as passive, but one of the things in this day and age is children are getting more into social media and staying online and are not getting out into the community or not getting involved in sports and activities. And I think we want to encourage that for their mental health, for their physical health. And the more that we can do that, I think that just benefits everybody in general. So I think those are kind of my big points on that. So with that being said, yes, go ahead.
We're the long-winded side of the table, and as I said at the start, I agree with Brian that I think we should go through our thought process and how we get to where we are. So if you would,
of course.
Permit me, I have a few more.
Do you want to go
things
park
that I'd
by
like to
park?
say.
I was going to go like park by park.
I was going to sort of look at it
go for
together
it.
because,
yeah.
So for me, as I looked at this project, I looked at different factors that were impactful, and obviously the number of homes that are going to be protected by the plan, the cost, the overall cost of the project, the impact of any changes to any given park, how the parks are used now, how they might be used in the future, the number of trees removed, the types of trees removed, the impact on future park district operations, and obviously any resident input as well. I mean, that was sort of the universe that I looked at. That those are the factors that go into my decision. And I think what was most fascinating to me as I looked at each of the three parks, I prioritized those factors differently based on the unique situations in each of those parks. So if I just wanted to go through each of them for me, and then however we want to go moving forward. But for Thornwood Park, and obviously we're doing this because we want to improve the residents' lives and we want to solve stormwater problems. And I've always lived near Thornwood Park. I've lived in a number of homes, but all of them kind of within walking distance. And so, that's the park that I'd like to see kind of the biggest vault, and, for me personally. But what was interesting was that the number of people protected and how we were going to protect them wasn't the most important factor for me at Thornwood Park. If we all remember, the original plan was for about a 10 or a 10.5 acre-foot vault, and that plan was going to have very little impact on the park. But then when the village came back and optimized, and by the way, I give them a ton of credit for what they've done. I think in the end, we're going to be able to protect as many structures and have as much benefit as the other plan, which I think in the end would have cost $30 million more. So from a financial planning perspective, I think the village knocked it out of the park. But the result was that we were going to have to dramatically change all aspects of Thornwood Park. And I remember talking to some of the village elected officials, talking to some of the administrators, and I basically shared with them that I didn't think I could support that plan, that I wanted to find a way to go back to the 10.5 acre foot vault because the cost was just too great in terms of what that park was going to look like. And so I give them a ton of credit again for coming back and coming up with a deeper vault with pumps and all of the situation we talked about with that. But the bottom line was they have found a way to really preserve most of the key elements of that park. And so for me, the number one factor for Thornwood Park was the preservation of the trees and maintaining the park the way it is now. But then I moved on to Hibbard Park, and I looked at that very differently. And again, I think it was Ben who came here with his kids at the beginning of the night, and he talked about the notion that let me take a step back and I'll come back to what he had said. We all heard it, but the prior board took a look at that park and recognized that at some point over the next 100 years, we may have to revisit our community recreation center. As Amy had said, we filled it up, and where we're going to be 10 or 20 or 40 or 80 years from now, we don't really know. And so I give the village and the prior park board a ton of credit, tremendous amount of credit, for coming back and hiring a space planner and taking a look at what we might need at some point in the future. And the fact, sort of like what Sunset Ridge did with their school, we might at some point need to take that building down and build another one before it comes down. And I think what Ben had said, and the way that we looked at that was we identified 2 potential footprints and said we don't want to touch either of those footprints. And I think Ben came in today and said, well, you don't need to build on both. We'll just choose one. And going back to Brian's comment, we might be able to do something that removes fewer trees or whatever the case may be. But for me, I'm not willing to consider that option because I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what we're going to need in 10 or 30 or 50 or 100 years. And so in that park, the most important consideration for me was that we don't do anything that would limit our options as a park district. And so then I move forward to the community playfields. And again, we've gone round and round about this and back and forth. And the good news about the community playfields plan is whatever we do, we're going to address the flooding. I mean, we're going to be able to put a tank that's optimally sized according to the village. We're going to be able to handle the flooding piece of it. So then what comes next? And for me, what comes next is improving the primary purpose of that park. And for me, the primary purpose of that park is for group sports activities. And I think back when I was on the board 6 years ago, I remember a situation where there was a cross-country meet. I think it was a junior high cross-country meet. And conditions were less than optimal, and everybody kind of ran right through the middle of all the fields. And I mean, Steve knows, I talked to Bill Lambrick, I think, almost every week for the better part of a year, trying to get the grass to grow again, and we just couldn't grow it because of the way that the fields were used. And if we take a look at those fields versus some of our neighboring communities' fields, the conditions there are less than desirable. I think, as Amy had said, we do have flooding issues, we have moisture issues. Somebody earlier, I think Brian maybe had said something about how the fields aren't quite as level as some of our neighbors' fields. And really, for me, it's very important that we make those fields as usable as we can. That's the primary place where we're supposed to conduct those activities. And then there's been a lot of talk about demand and need, short-term or long-term. And I think, I don't know if everyone here is aware, I know that we are all aware, that the reality is that since, for the entirety of my lifetime, we've had an 8-acre park at Avoca Park. And that's been programmed for these types of field activities as well. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've fully programmed that park. We use that park. We have plenty of activities in that park, and that's now gone, and I don't believe that's coming back. And so when we talk about demand and need, the fact of the matter is there are 8 less acres of these types of fields available to us. So for me, as I had said in the July meeting, and I would have said it at the June meeting, I just didn't happen to be here, unfortunately, at the June meeting, I really see us as having a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity not to recapture the full 8 acres. Those 8 acres are gone, but between a third and a half of it. And, I know that the Park District has done an excellent job of trying to figure out how we're going to program, deal with those activities that were going on at Avoca. But, starting next year to be able to use this space as well, it seems to me to be an easy decision. So those are my thoughts on the 3 parks.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so moving forward, we have a resolution. But before we do that, I think I'd like to just kind of go through each of the parks. I think we can kind of start with the easier ones that are not as contentious this evening, and just quickly get thoughts on, we'll start with Thornwood. Is everybody in agreement with the alternative configuration that's being proposed in the memorandum of understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
I am. I think the neighborhood group asking, for consideration about possibly shifting the tank westward, I think it'd be good to consider that, but otherwise I'm in agreement with the proposed double tank and saving of the trees. So with, as they said, well, we can still talk about the details.
Absolutely.
And I would echo Brian's comments. I think those were some great points that were raised by the neighborhood group.
And just so everyone knows, this memorandum of understanding is a non-binding agreement between us and the village. It's not in any way saying that we're going to have to do all these things. The only thing that would bind us together is the intergovernmental agreement that we will sign down the road. This is just a stepping point for us in the process of this so that the village can continue to work with the engineers and put more significant dollars into designing all these tanks.
But it does let the engineers start moving down on a particular design path.
Correct.
That is really the intent, is for the engineers to move forward and not be suddenly, that we change our mind with regard to how these tanks might, major changes.
Correct. But again, with that too, they might come up with some value engineering as they've moved forward in this last month. There might be things that shift just from what they're finding. So it's not.
I would look forward to continuing to talk to them about these designs, but we're basically telling them that this is the way we wish you to go.
Yes, correct. Okay, so Thornwood Park. Okay, Hibbard Park. I believe it was alternative.
Alternative 1.
Sorry, I'm getting all my alternatives messed up. It's easier when they have a letter associated with them.
Yes,
again,
alternative 1.
It saved most of the trees.
Saves most of the trees
All but 8.
and keeps the options open for future planning for parks and buildings.
Yes.
Okay, so on to community playfields. I don't know how we want to handle this. I guess we'll just go through and talk about what your thinking is of which option you prefer. Brian, do you want to start?
Sure, I can support any of the options except for the first option, which is the one that takes down the grove. So, certainly the deeper tank, as much as my engineered mind says, make it gravity, at least half of the tank flows out by gravity. It's considerably cheaper by the estimates, although I must say in my industry, there is a saying that estimates are a series of offsetting mistakes. So, be that as it may, $2 million does sound like a savings. But I could support any of these as long as we save what I think is clearly very important to the community and particularly the neighbors, which is the grove of trees. I'll support 80.
So would you?
No.
So would your preference be then? Because we have to put one configuration in, is in the memorandum.
Well, it's, we can go around this a couple of times. Let's see where we find out. I don't know.
Okay. Mike?
As I said before, I support the original plan.
Okay. Todd?
I do support the original plan. And one of my biggest reasons is this picture. And it's 60 to 80 ducks in a pond in the middle of the park. So, because
Yeah, what's wrong with it?
That's what
it's not really usable.
Oh, it is for the ducks.
But when you have to cancel recess and you have to cancel PE and this type of thing.
Okay. No. Okay. It's not a back and forth.
Right.
That's okay. Cecilia?
I guess I feel like we can accomplish both items, and so pretty much I would say I'm in favor of the pump system with an additional stormwater tank to take the water from the detention pond. That leaves the grove, leaves our options open if we are at a point where we need to use that field.
So the U or the T?
U, because the U does have and putting those together actually is a savings over the original configuration amount.
U
so
with
you're
the
saving-
pump.
U with the pump. It's
Plus the
less,
bolt.
it's less than the original configuration, and it seems to accomplish what is necessary.
Okay.
That's my.
Okay. Julia?
Yeah, and as we've learned more about the financial engineering and found cost savings, particularly that there was a T alternative that would remove one tree, as well as the U, which reserves some options for later. I am open to either alternative 2 or 3, but I want to
So,
continue.
I'm sorry, can you give me letters? Is that U?
U and Z.
U and Z.
As long as we continue to look at the financials, because
Okay.
I want to make sure we're making the most cost-effective and also broadly keeping options open for the park district and school.
So you would
Just for clarification, is it the Z, which is alternative 1, or the T, which I think is like an
The
adjustment?
T is not numbered at this point, so I think
Yeah.
T is a version of Z.
Okay.
So
I think
So-
T is a little less, it costs less than the Z.
you're saying including that extra tank with those, like Cecilia said, or no?
So if we retain the natural detention, we don't need the extra tank.
Right.
If we add the extra tank, you would have to move earth and bring back engineering, but that's a modest cost relative to doing the work, whether or not we need it.
Okay. So that's no tank then now. Okay. Gordon?
Okay, I'm in the camp that Brian's in, which is I would support anything other than the original design, and honestly, I would go with all other things being equal. If we, as a group, get a majority that says we don't want to take down the trees and we're willing to stick with that, I would go with the cheapest option up front. That would be 2.
So U?
Or, yeah, U, or the Z is fine too, but,
Whatever the cheapest option is.
well, it's more along the lines of if we can come as a group and say, we know for sure we don't want to take down the trees, and we don't want the option to take down the trees in the future, then I would say we go with you. If the way to make this happen is to have options in the future to take down the trees, and that's what it's going to take to get the vote, I would go with the other option.
Okay. You guys can hold your applause to the end. It just makes it easier for us to hear. Thanks. For me, I don't think I can get behind a plan that doesn't fix the drainage, and I think one of those things is adding the extra tank. I have been in favor of the original plan. However, after hearing everybody, if there's some way that we could, maybe down the line, but I can't get behind something that doesn't have that extra tank in it, whatever the plan is, because I think we need to improve the drainage there. I don't think it's usable for the schools. I think it impacts a lot of things over in the park. So at this point, I'm still in favor of the original, unless I can hear another reason why there's something else should be put in with the extra tank.
I could support any of the alternative plans with an extra tank, sure. But again, my main issue is the tank, is the growth. So.
But are we being asked to determine the engineering feasibility of the extra tank right now? I don't know if that's our call.
It's
I mean,
feasible.
alternative 1 has the extra tank built
Right,
into
exactly.
it. So it's there. And I guess I guess I'm going back to is that if we go with the U shape and the alternative, we are still less than the original configuration. So it's not, there is a cost savings there built into that.
The original plan, not the original alternative, or the original.
The only one that has a secondary vault is the original plan.
Right.
All the other
yes.
ones do not.
We'd have to add it, but the
Correct.
U shape, the deeper with the pump and the secondary vault added to that is less than the original configuration.
Correct.
So the U plan with the extra tank is the cheapest plan
Well, the U tank without.
It's still cheaper than the original.
than the
one.
original. Yeah,
It's a lower upfront cost.
correct.
Or
It's not cheaper,
It
but yes.
shifts the burden and the cost to parks, or to public works.
And
not to-
honestly, like down the road, what's going to compel us to potentially, I would love to keep the option open, if we find that we have a huge demand for space, that we can take these trees down, and we don't want to have.
Yeah. And one of my concerns, given what we hear about cottonwoods, is that 5 years down the road, we're going to have a storm, and a number of them will not be able to survive that storm. And that's really where I feel, though, then we've kind of kept the options over. So I'd hate to have something that doesn't have that secondary, that makes that land unusable, even if we, say, somehow lose half those trees because of their age. So So that's where I'm thinking, using that, we have a savings, we keep options open, we retain the Grove, and it seems like, as Brian says, there's really no losers. I don't know if there's really any losers there. So that's.
But we have to give some direction to the village
Right.
as far as what configuration we're looking at, so.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Maybe we vote on whether or not we want the original plan, which takes down the trees, or whether we want a different plan that doesn't take down the trees. That, to me,
I
is
don't
sort
know
of, if
if
we can get
that's-
past that, then we can start talking about if it's.
See, because I think I'm with, here is that I want a plan that resolves some of the drainage issues, because that's, and I know people here, but that's been and perhaps it's, again, self-experiences where I've always walked through and I've never found that really usable area for anyone to play, because it's always has standing
So
water.
for clarification, drainage you're talking about, you're not talking about all of the playing fields, because under any scenario, that's going to improve. It's
Yes.
just
The drainage in
within
that
the
area.
berm,
It's that.
in the grove.
The
Right.
manufactured detention area.
What they call the detention area, which under heavy rains will fill up with water and slowly
I
drain
think more
away.
than just heavy rains, but.
What I'm hearing is Commissioner Clark and Wolf are asking that additional tank would be put underground in order to eliminate the detention area that is currently in place. And I can get behind that.
So it would no longer fill. In theory, it would drain to
would-
the underground second.
It would have its own little tank,
Right.
because not all storm water is equal. We don't need to go into that.
There's different flow rates and things like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Would it still
This is the
fill?
detention
No,
area
no,
to
that's-
handle.
that area
high
would
crest.
not fill.
If it exists with the berm?
No.
So we'd
We'd have to
we'd have to level that, correct?
level that.
The berm would need to be leveled.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're making assumptions, maybe we should.
Should we, is that true? I mean, is that?
Confirm that, yes.
Any engineers want to comment on that?
Sure, it's been a while since we've talked about this.
Hello, Darren Olson with Christopher Burke Engineering, part of the engineering team for the project. So the question was regarding the berm.
So if we were to put an additional tank to take the water from that area, could that area be leveled such that it wouldn't fill with just natural water?
That is correct. The purpose of that berm was put in solely to store water there, and if we're no longer required to store water there from a permit perspective because we put it underground, we could remove that berm.
So is it removing the berm, or are you also raising the land there too?
We would not raise the land. That would affect the trees, so we would just simply remove the berm.
Okay.
And would it no longer flood there?
The flooding would be reduced because there is the berm is gone and the restrictor would be removed. But again, this park is lower than most of the land on the west side of the village, so during extreme storm events, it would still continue to hold water as it does now.
The entire,
go
the
ahead.
entire park or just that area?
Just that area, the lower parts of the park, which are generally the southern.
South.
It would be improved from in any situation, it would be improved than what it currently is, correct?
That is correct. Dramatically improved, but during the greatest of great storm events, it will still
We
hold.
get 10 inches of rain, all bets are off.
And I
right?
guess, but one other point, like, let's say 10 years from now, we have a need for that area as a field, we could grade the land or add dirt to raise it to create a drier field?
There could be some leveling that would
Right.
be done, but again, this area does, during the most extreme storm events, hold some water, so we would not want to displace that water, because then it would have to go somewhere
But to
else.
answer your question, that detention area would be gone, and the need for that detention area would be supplemented by a tank that's now underground. So I think that was your question, your point of your question. It would not be a need for a detention area if you
Would
wish to grab
any
it.
of
in the
these
future.
plans, when you add a secondary tank, have a greater or lesser ability to improve the drainage of the park?
And even with regards to the original, and then
Original 1, 2, 3, 4, with 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever the alternatives, when you add that secondary, do they all drain the park equally?
yes, during final design, there's quite a bit that we can do to help the drainage in the surrounding park areas, and that is independent of which one of these that we choose.
I actually don't have a question for you. I have a question for the executive director. If we were to do something along these lines, would it then create more usable space to the north of the Grove that we currently don't program in? If that space were now dried out?
Yeah, if that space is dried out, if the water that normally would collect in that area now is collecting subsurface, and supposing no major 10-inch rain events, the area that is flat enough will be used. There are slopes in there, but it would definitely provide some utility for used space, probably the smaller size fields that we use.
So just to clarify, if we, choose one of the options that includes a separate detention tank so we can dry out that space, there's a way to both create additional playfield space and preserve the trees. Well, that seems like a no-brainer.
Is it possible to use, is it possible to use, since we're putting these tanks in there, we're going to be taking out dirt, to have some of that, to your point, somewhat, not regraded completely, but to make it more level for, in the areas?
Yeah, that was my exact thought process. As soon as we got down this line, it's details that engineers can answer better than me. These were the questions I was going to ask.
You're back.
Little nitty-gritty
Sorry about
things,
that.
just help us make our, in the front row. Too far. But as we're taking this dirt out to put the tanks in, could some of the dirt be used to help grade, make it a little more even, to add in a few more fields, or fix that area?
In general, we plan to fix the drainage not by filling the land, but by adding additional under drains to areas that are soggy.
But if we wanted to make it more level a little bit, is that possible?
We can level things generally by shaving areas down, but we really want to be careful about putting fill in this park, because again, the park is the lowest spot on the west side of town, and if we put in fill to displace floodwaters during a 10-inch rain event, those waters have to go somewhere else. And the whole purpose of this project is to not put that water onto streets and into people's yards.
Correct. Right. That's the last thing we want to do.
Right.
And yet, again, this is going to substantially improve the drainage situation. The first 3 inches of the water is going.
That's correct. The drainage on the west side is going to be, as we've all seen through the presentations, is going to be dramatically improved as part of this. We just want to make sure that that's maintained with whatever alternative that's chosen.
Okay. Great. So what are our options now? Where do we?
Well, I believe that you and Commissioner Clark have expressed interest in the what we call the deep or the U tank with an additional storage tank in it, and I think you can find support for that option. Now, I don't know how we wish to eliminate these, or we just want to go straight to that. I'll leave that up to the board.
I agree with Gordon. I think that we obviously want to make sure that we're being good stewards of all the taxpayers' money, and that whatever tank we're choosing, if it doesn't really matter the exact letter shape of it, that we're choosing whatever the village can engineer to be the most cost-effective, but also create the driest area and keeping the trees. So I don't know what that letter looks like.
Well, it's U plus tank plus.
And I do one last just to make clarification that if we do go with that additional tank, that would still be a gravity-driven tank, that secondary tank. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, we're getting nods from the engineers on that one.
They'll throw in.
The secondary
So,
tank.
like, let's say we go with the U shape. The U
gravity-based,
shape would be pumped, but the secondary would not.
It won't need its own pumping station or anything like that.
And when you say
Two knots.
Well,
I'm trying to think if I have that original.
is that this? No.
yes.
Because this.
So at this point, does the village think the T is a better design? Could the T be maximized if it was double the width with a pumping station? Like, what's our best value
Well,
here?
my simple math, I know, we haven't seen it, but it sounds like the simple math of the T system with the additional tank,
That one is.
10.9 plus 1.4, if my math is right, would be 12.3 million. The deeper pump-based system would be 9.8 plus the 1.4, which would be 11.2.
Right.
So it would be $1.1 million less expensive up front, and the question is whether the ongoing maintenance costs over time would be greater than that, and we'll let the finance folks answer that question. My gut tells me a 1.1 delta is probably substantial. You know, when it's a $400,000, $500,000, $800,000 delta, I'm not sure it is. But somebody's got to go through the assumptions and do the math, because I think we're all committed to trying to be fiscally conservative with this project.
I think that as soon as we get a pumping station there, though, that we do to kind of tie our hands for the future. So whatever we do, because the U, it looks like it's a half gravity fed and half pumped. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
The lower half is pumped.
So you'd prefer to see a system with no pump?
no pump.
So that's probably the T.
Or the Z.
The Z is a little bit more expensive.
I think we can say that if we're going to go gravity, we're talking T, not Z, because it's in effect the same exact thing.
Perfect. $500,000 left.
Reshaped.
Perfect.
But
Awesome.
we have the village engineer here who's going to clarify some of these numbers we've been throwing around.
This is numbers that have come out either. I know. It's a little frustrating.
Good evening, and thank you again for entertaining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for changing your vacation plans to be here.
No problem at all. No problem
We'll
at all.
be here all week.
Don't say that.
The question was asked and what the village's preference is, and I think we've gone on record as the best engineering choice. The most reliable choice is one that does not include a pump station. So that would not be the U configuration. It would be the T configuration. The T is more economical than the original configuration. It's also quicker to build, which is to everybody's benefit, and it relies on gravity, which is the best performing system. So that would be our
And that additional tank could be added with the T.
Absolutely.
But Bridget, are we supposed to give you some sort of direction tonight about which way we're going? Because I haven't seen a T plan. And it's hard for me to, I mean, yeah, it sounds great. It's sort of like that, behind door number 3.
Sure.
And I don't know what's behind door number 3.
We can show you.
Now?
If you like.
Let's take a look.
So, Brian, it's the Z just reconfigured. It's just moving a part around, so their excavation, their plus minuses, it's just more economic and efficient.
And it saves a
And it's actually a
pretty much the same.
smaller impact area than the Z
Right.
configuration. So it's a win-win from all those aspects.
Okay. As long as it's not taking down the grove.
It does not.
I'm over here
Preserves
saying
the
that's
grove.
great.
Thank you. Okay, given this new information and
Can we just add one more piece of information? We've been talking about how the T is more economical than the Z. Can we just put those numbers on the record? Both the base cost plus
The tank.
the tank cost. So we are truly talking apples to apples here.
And don't give us two numbers for the T and the Z, give us the total
with the tank,
with the tank.
the extra tank.
Do math in my head.
Sorry.
Don't make us add.
I'm an engineer. You're going to make me do math in my head? So the Z configuration would be 11.4 plus the 1.1.
It's 1.1. All right.
So that would be 12.5, I believe.
5, right.
The T configuration is 10.9 plus the same 1.1, so that would be 12.
12-0.
Right.
Okay. And the U, which we're not considering anymore because that involves a pump, correct? Really?
Would be
Oh, okay.
9.8 plus 1.1, which is 10.9. Is that correct?
Well, we have pumps in every other park.
11.
That's, I know.
Yes.
11.1.
9.8 plus
No,
1.1.
10.9.
So the
Right?
Again, I'm
10.9.
U is 10.9?
9.8 plus 1 is 10.8 plus another 1 gets you a little bit over 11.
9.8 plus 1.1 is 10.9.
Plus another million.
No, another 100,000.
Right, correct.
10.9.
We're on the
correct?
same page.
Okay.
10.9.
So
We're all good.
the pump saves over $1 million, at least in these estimates.
Correct.
Yep.
Again, I'll do anything as long as we can save the grove.
But it is the village's desire, preference to have a gravity fed because it does less maintenance and,
We're getting a head nod from Bridget.
yes.
So our direction is, Bridget, you can do the T or the U? Is that sort of where we're heading towards?
I think that's the direction we should give them. You're right, as opposed to picking one.
Specific letter.
Because, again, I think we're comfortable with either of those alternatives and let them do their work and make their recommendation and make their decision. I think we're saying we're comfortable with either of those. Is that correct? That's what I hear people saying.
The T or the Z?
The T or the Z?
No, you mean the
No, no, the U or the Z.
Not the U.
You were the
The U or the T.
Not
One more
the
time.
T.
The U or the T.
U
We're done.
or T?
Yes.
Not
Okay.
the U for me, just because of, that's when it has the pump.
Right.
Okay.
And so my thought is if we're going to, and I'm fine with the T, let me just say that. I'm good with the T as long as it drains the fields. But the nice thing about not having the pump is it doesn't tie our hands for the future, and so we're buying options.
I think that's what they're going to pick anyway, just between you and me, based on how people are nodding in the back.
So I don't know how this affects our memorandum, the wording.
It changes your exhibit.
It changes it, so.
Changes the exhibit, but not the wording. Is
Okay.
that right?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't even have it on my thing anymore.
Because the wording refers to the exhibit.
So is it something that can be modified?
Absolutely.
To give the village the ability to maximize the project cost effectively, but keeping our priorities? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Sorry, I don't have it on my computer
I'm just
anymore.
scanning it real quick.
Paper copy. Sorry, thanks for bearing with us, everybody.
So the only reference within the memorandum of understanding is to the attached exhibit.
Okay.
So what will change compared to what is in your packet is Exhibit A for item A and number 3 will change from the original plan to a new exhibit provided by the engineers for the T plan.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Given that, any more discussion on this?
Well, I'm voting on a plan I've never seen,
Correct.
but
A leap of faith, Brian.
I guess so.
Or a leap of faith. I'm just
But
kidding.
I don't think anybody's going to blame me.
May I have a motion? I don't have it in front of me, so I can't read it. Can someone make a motion, please?
I move to approve the memorandum of understanding with,
Well, there's a very specific motion to read.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I've got it.
Yeah, I think I need to
I
do that.
move we approve the resolution? Is
Okay,
that the
I
language?
Yes.
Yes.
Approve the resolution 2019 R9 approving the terms and authorizing the execution of a memorandum of understanding between Wilmette Park District and Village of Wilmette for the construction, operation, and maintenance of stormwater improvements on certain Park District-owned properties.
Second.
No.
More to the.
Do we need to?
With
We have debated the tank
Updating
location and the tank type at community playfields. I was waiting to get to the memorandum of understanding, and so there's some, I haven't made my comments about the entire memorandum.
Okay. Would you like to make those now?
I withdraw the motion.
No, it's fine.
No, you don't have to.
Motion
No.
and second,
It's-
then discussion.
I reinstate my motion.
Yeah, no,
We're
we
still
can
learning.
discuss.
We're still learning.
We can discuss.
Because, we really don't want to sleep tonight.
No, we got a motion and a second, so we're,
Okay,
so,
sorry.
Now we're having a discussion.
and now we're having discussion, and then we'll vote. And that's
Okay.
the way.
The language of
That's
the
the way-
MOU, is that right?
Yes, I
So-
think he wants to discuss the language.
All right, so there's a number of things said and unsaid within the memorandum of understanding. The most important to me is when we get to, it's in the packet, page 125, but it is of the memorandum of understanding. I believe it's on the second page, item number 2, the grant of easement. It says, upon successful negotiation and execution of one or more intergovernmental agreements with terms and conditions acceptable to the parties, the Park District shall grant the village certain non-exclusive perpetual easements and certain temporary construction easements that allow the village to install, yada, yada, yada. It is the term perpetual that I'm having difficulty with, and as far as I know, there have been mentions about whether or not this is going to be forever, or whether or not this should be a lease, or whether or not this should have a sunset clause. Personally, I know that we have talked about these tanks have a life cycle. Also, even the village, in their study, had agreed that conveyance is a better way to go, and we know that this whole stormwater system in Wilmette will need to be replaced over time and probably should be replaced in a way that we're going to conveyance. So I'm tripping over the word perpetual easements forever. I'm kind of philosophically opposed to giving away parkland forever. So I would strike that word and just say non-exclusive easements, and I realize that we still have a lot of work to do here, or we can debate the issue tonight. So, but perpetual. I have other...
Can we talk about that one for a second?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, just because I actually read the same document. I had a similar question. I called Steve. I asked him a little bit about it. It's my understanding that this is a non-binding document, so this is an issue that we could look at and study and discuss before the intergovernmental agreement is finalized. And by using this language, we in no way prevent ourselves from having that conversation in the future. Is that correct?
That is correct. Furthermore, you know, it's almost unheard of to give a utility easement with a sunset clause because the utilities are not installed with the mindset that they're going to be removed. And quite honestly, if it isn't perpetual at the end of whatever term, we might buy the maintenance of that tank. And these are all things that we need to address within the framework of the intergovernmental agreement to make sure that doesn't happen.
And by the way, I heard what you had said when you and I had that conversation, and I'm inclined to agree with you. I just haven't thought about it.
Right.
So I just want to have time to think about it.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
As long as we have the ability to revisit, I'm comfortable with the language the way it is
And
now.
correct me if I'm wrong, when we did our intergovernmental agreement on West Park, it has that exact same language of perpetual.
This is the exact same
language.
I
So it's-
realize.
there is a
but
precedent for that.
Well, yes, there's a precedent, but I still object to the term. I don't know why we should include it in this agreement. We haven't debated it, we haven't discussed it, we haven't come to any agreement, so why are we putting into this agreement the word perpetual?
I don't think we need the word in there to complete the memorandum of understanding. So
I
take
would-
it out for now, and then we can talk about it later.
Either or.
Is there any reason to keep it in there?
Like we said, this is non-binding.
Okay.
Well,
so it could come out, it can stay in, has about the same effect. It's all going to be addressed in the IGA.
Okay. Well, if it would make commissioners feel more comfortable, I don't really...
Yeah, I actually had a different take on it. I was worried that we'd get stuck with the decayed underground thing in our park that we didn't want back. We wanted to make sure that the village took care of what was there and replaced it at its end of life, and so that was my concern. I wasn't worried about,
So that's something we can discuss over the next couple of months.
Yeah,
as we prepare
absolutely.
the agreement.
Right.
And again, all of our documents are looked at by our attorney that just works for us. So it's not like we have, and the village has their own attorneys and they review them as well. So they're looking at it through that lens to make sure that we're not binding ourselves to anything that could harm us down the road. Does anybody else have any strong opinions to taking it out, keeping it in?
It's fine to take it out. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, in the interest of moving forward.
And it's fine for us to discuss it. I mean, yes, it's okay to have difference of opinions, but it's like...
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I don't think, I said here, I don't think it's an issue taking it out or keeping it in. Let's just move forward.
It sounds like there's a consensus to remove the word perpetual from the memorandum.
Okay, we'll get there.
Any other discussion? Oh, you had more, Brian.
Well, there are certain things that, again, they're not mentioned in here, but I just want to make sure about the expectations. And I know the Thornwood group mentioned it, but there's a lot of details that need to be worked out: pump locations, generation, park amenities, things that matter to our patrons in our parks. And so even though it's not in here, my expectations are that we will continue to review the design, and we will give an opportunity for the public to join us in improving the design as it progresses through the three main design phases. My other expectation is, and as we mentioned it tonight, actually, is that the the stormwater will improve the stormwater drainage within the parks. So that was talked about a lot tonight. And that we would quickly restore our parks to their full functionality and minimize construction impact to the neighborhoods, e.g. reasonable work hours, truck routing, dust control, security, and these other expectations, and that we would work that out. And this, again, these are simply my expectations, but I wanted to make sure I stated them as such. So I don't need to change the agreement, just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second.
Yeah.
Any other
I'm
discussion?
Can I just have one more thing?
Could we clarify that motion? Yeah.
Yes, wait, sorry, can
Yes,
I?
and I
let
do,
Commissioner Clark-
and I raised this with Stephen, I'm just going to raise it again. Under the village obligations, it does say that the village shall construct the storage reservoirs and restore the locations in the manner, never mind. The issue here is not what I, never mind. It looks like what's here is different than what I read. Never mind, I withdraw my any comments.
So can we have the motion repeated, please, since it's been a while?
Let me go back to that.
Sorry.
Before we even do this, I'm really kind of happy that we had this discussion, because you know what, when the only options on the table are where it will allow you to have flexibility in the future and still drain, you know, I felt kind of like my hands were tied, because that's, and I think you probably felt similar. I'm really happy that we had this discussion, so, and that we had option T.
Yeah, and it's important that everybody knows, like, we don't talk about this stuff when we leave these meetings. We have our discussions here, and so this is our chance to discuss it and to look at all the finer points. And so I think we did a really good tonight, and I thank everyone for sticking around. So that being said, may we have the motion repeated, please?
I move to approve Resolution 2019-R9, approving the terms and authorizing the execution of a memo of understanding between Wilmette Park District and Village of Wilmette for the construction, operation, and maintenance of stormwater improvements on certain Park District-owned properties.
As amended.
As amended.
Thank you.
I second.
Thank you. We have a
And
second.
those amendments are, that we're going with Plan T with the extra tank, and we're removing perpetual.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Abbott?
Yes.
Commissioner Murdoch?
Yes.
Commissioner Schisler?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Goebel?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Commissioner Wolf?
Yes.
Resolution is approved.
Thank you.
That's great.
I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
We
All those in
second.
favor?
Yes.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.